The surf was calm that morning. Gentle, quiet. Waves barely broke against the rocky cliffs near Sunset Cliffs Natural Park in San Diego. It was April 15th, 1994, Good Friday. A man walking along the cliffs that morning noticed something out in the water. A pale shape, bobbing between swells, moving just enough to suggest it wasn't debris. He watched it for a moment, then realized it was a body. The authorities were called. Lifeguards waded in and brought it to shore. The body was that of a young woman, unclothed, her injuries extensive and strange. At first glance, it looked like a shark attack. Her leg was missing from the thigh down, her pelvis shattered, her neck was broken, but the more they looked, the more the details began to fray. There were no tooth marks, no sign of a struggle with a living animal, and the body wasn't decomposed, as it should have been had it drifted far or long. The woman was later identified as 25-year-old Michelle von Emster. And the mystery of what happened to her on that quiet San Diego night has never been fully explained. Officially, she was attacked by a shark, but nothing about her injuries or her life in the hours before her death quite fits that story. This is the strange, silent death of Michelle von Emster, and the more you look at it, the less it makes sense. Michelle was born in 1968 and grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area. Her friends described her as free-spirited, smart, and spiritual, a woman who had the soul of an artist, the discipline of a worker, and the warmth of someone always seeking connection. In her early 20s, Michelle was diagnosed with cancer, bone cancer. She fought hard. She lost part of her femur and required a titanium rod in her leg. She recovered, but never fully. She walked with a slight limp. Still, she pushed forward. By 1994, she had moved to San Diego to start over. She lived near Ocean Beach in a small apartment and worked at a local coffee house called the Crystal Dolphin. She walked or biked to work, journaled often, and spent time at the beach almost daily. Locals remembered her as kind, introspective, and independent. The kind of person who would strike up conversations about books, art, or spiritual matters, then ride her bike home in the moonlight without a second thought. She was a creature of habit. That's what made what happened next so strange. On April 14th, the day before her body was discovered, Michelle wasn't acting out of character, but there were oddities. That evening, she had dinner with her roommate, who noted that Michelle seemed slightly restless. Around 8 p.m., she left the apartment, saying she wanted to take a walk. She didn't take her purse, didn't bring a towel, she wasn't dressed for the beach. She just left. The roommate assumed she'd gone for a short stroll and would be back, but she never returned. Sometime that night, Michelle vanished, and sometime before dawn, she died. The autopsy results came back quickly, and they were alarming. Michelle had sustained massive trauma. Her right leg was gone from the mid-thigh down. The femur was shattered. Her pelvis was crushed. She had broken ribs, and her neck was fractured. There were scratches on her face and abrasions on her body, and yet there was something off. The medical examiner concluded that her leg had been bitten off by a shark. That was the official cause of death. It was written down, certified, and archived, but almost immediately people began to raise questions, starting with the pathologist herself. Dr. Brian Blackburn, chief medical examiner, later stated that while a shark attack was plausible, there were inconsistencies. There were no serrated tooth marks, no classic crescent-shaped wounds, no tissue tearing consistent with a shark's bite. The leg was cleanly severed. Too cleanly. Moreover, there were no signs of blood loss, meaning Michelle was likely dead before the leg was removed. And sharks don't eat corpses. Not typically. They're attracted to movement, vibration, thrashing. So if Michelle was dead before her leg was removed, then it wasn't a shark that killed her. The injuries to her neck and pelvis were also unusual. The neck fracture was high and clean, as if caused by a sharp impact or whiplash, less like a fall, more like deliberate force. Her pelvis had multiple fracture lines consistent with blunt trauma. One forensic expert said it looked like she had been dropped or slammed onto something hard. And then there was the matter of the titanium rod. Michelle's surgical implant was missing from her femur. The area around it had been shattered. Authorities initially suggested it had fallen out or disintegrated due to the ocean conditions or the shark attack. But orthopedic experts later testified that titanium doesn't dissolve in salt water, and it doesn't just fall out. It would take deliberate force, tools, extraction. So where was the rod? It was never recovered. Not from the ocean, not from the autopsy site, not from anywhere. It was simply gone, and that, more than anything, made people start whispering murder. Let's go back to her final hours. Michelle left her apartment around 8 p.m. Witnesses place her near the beach sometime after that. One homeless man claimed to have seen her sitting alone near the cliffs, staring out at the water. He remembered her because she seemed calm, almost meditative. That same man later said he saw her walk down toward the rocks alone. But another witness, a local woman walking her dog, claimed she heard a scream that night, sharp and cut off, near the same area. She didn't think much of it at the time. Now it haunts her. The authorities stuck to their ruling: accidental death due to shark attack. Case closed. But over time, the questions only deepened. For one, Michelle was terrified of swimming in the ocean at night. Friends said she avoided it entirely. She liked the beach, but wasn't the kind to go for a midnight swim, especially alone. Second, her clothes were found nearby, neatly folded. That doesn't match the panic of a shark attack, nor does it match the randomness of a suicide. And then there's the diary. When her family went through Michelle's things, they found her journal. The final entry, written the day she died, was cryptic. It spoke of letting go of fear, of cleansing, of darkness and renewal. Some have read it as spiritual, others suicidal. But her closest friends insisted Michelle was not suicidal. She had survived cancer. She had made plans. She had just bought concert tickets. And most importantly, her journal entries always ended with a prayer. That one didn't. Rumors swirled. Some said Michelle had uncovered something. Others suggested she had met someone that night. A stranger, maybe not a stranger, a man, possibly someone with access to surgical tools. There were whispers that her body had been staged, dumped after death, that the injuries weren't accidental, that the titanium rod was removed to hide something. Still, no solid suspects emerged. No arrest, no follow-up. It faded. Years later, local journalists took another look. A reporter named Neil Collins began digging into Michelle's case. He interviewed pathologists, shark experts, trauma surgeons. One expert from the Scripps Institute of Oceanography stated flatly, "This was not a shark attack." Another said, "Sharks don't do what happened to her." Something else did. Collins published a feature in 2008. It raised every question that had been ignored, but it didn't change the official record. Even today, Michelle's death remains officially ruled an accident. But no one really believes that anymore. So what really happened that night? Was Michelle von Emster killed by someone she trusted? Did she meet a stranger who turned violent? Was she stalked, followed to the cliffs, pushed or beaten? Or was it something else entirely? The strange, clean removal of her leg, the missing titanium rod, the lack of blood, the crushed pelvis. Too much doesn't fit. Too much was written off too fast, and maybe that's the scariest part. Not just what happened to Michelle, but how quickly the truth was buried beneath the waves. She deserved more. She still does. Thank you for listening to The Lantern's Tale. Subscribe for more true stories, if you dare.